So, you're back. You know, I'm just saying. So I just did this whole introduction telling you all about this book, right? Well, now I'm opening A Grand Canyon, One Man's Journey Through Depression, available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook online, wherever you go. Maybe not wherever. Don't look on Pornhub. Anyway, I just noticed the copyright date on this is 2014. I'm thinking I either forgot a whole lot that I worked on this book, or I just got it wrong. I just put the wrong date. Instead of 2004, I put 2014. It wouldn't be the first time. Probably wouldn't be the last time. Trying to turn this page, having no luck. Okay, so let's get started with chapter 1. But before we do, my dedication to the innumerable many who have been broken and lost, and who are working to find their way back from the edge. And to Vicky. The story you're about to read is entirely true. And boy, do I wish that wasn't the case. Chapter 1. This is where it's going to get interesting. Haven't done this before. It's going to be weird. The first time I wanted to kill myself was not the August of 1983. I'm doing well already. Was not in August of 1983. Dramatic structure would seem to make that more meaningful, but my problems all came long before then. My first suicide attempt went as far back as 1974. I was in the 3rd grade. I don't remember what trauma had gone on at the time, but I remember that I'd had enough. You see, I wasn't the most stable kid, and I hadn't been raised in the most stable environment. I was a nerdy kid, stuck in a world that didn't seem to care. Raised by a pretty unstable single parent, tormented by equally unstable siblings. My father had left 4 years before. I remember the day he pulled his old Ford out of the driveway of our home for the last time. My mother had woken us all up in the middle of the night, like a 5-alarm fire. And we didn't dress before heading outside. This was in a bygone day when all children wore pajamas, or so it seemed to my 5-year-old mind. My mother screamed like a woman having her guts ripped out without the benefit of anesthetic as my dad drove off in his car. It might have been our car. It might have been my mom's car. It wouldn't at all surprise me to find out that actually had been my mom's car. That's the kind of shitheel my dad was at the time. So, I didn't look at the others, my brother Keith or my sister Audrey, because my eyes were riveted on what was going on before me. I knew I couldn't miss a minute of it. Even as my dad slammed the car door and started the engine. Even as my mom continued to scream. When my dad began to back the car out of the driveway, my mom tried for a moment to hold on to the car door. She must have realized what a vain gesture that was, because she only did it for a moment before she let go. My father backed away. My father backed his car out onto the street and drove away. I don't know how we ever got back inside again. But we did. And my mom took good care of us, though I can't imagine how. We had nothing to begin with except a house. My dad let her keep the house. Even that was a struggle. I remember hearing her screaming about how hard it was for her to keep the house going. Whenever we would ask for some luxury or even some necessity that weren't yet a priority, awful writing, she would scream. Actually, my mother would scream a lot. She'd scream about how hard her life was, or how lonely she was, or how awful we kids were, and how much of a burden we were, and how terribly we treated her, and how rotten we were. And, well, it just got worse. But she was the only mom I had. As much as I hated the screaming, I never hated her. To be honest, I couldn't. My mother had drilled such a deep sense of guilt so far inside of me, an issue I still live with today, by telling me over and over how much she had sacrificed and how I should get down on my knees and thank her, and what a louse I was. I just felt sorry. And I felt that way most of the time. My mom's life was hard, and she passed that down to me, to all of us. She couldn't help it. It was practically genetic. Meanwhile, in the first few years at least, my dad would occasionally pop in from out of the blue. He would show up looking like he was doing pretty well for himself. I wouldn't know his side of the story for many years. He'd just show up, and we three kids would go out with him for the evening. That usually meant a Disney film. There were so many in the early 70s, though he'd always complain about the film as if he hated Disney. It took years for me to understand that it didn't matter whether he hated Disney films or not. He was making an attempt to spend time with his kids. And he was struggling too. But while my mom was always blatantly honest with me, sometimes painfully so, my dad was never much of a communicator. He didn't necessarily lie. He did lie. He lied all the time. His mouth was a constant stream of lies. It was the fonts from which all lies are born. Trust me, he lied. But he did leave a whole lot out of the conversation. So my point was that there was a lot he omitted. And there was also a lot he downright lied about. I wrote this while my dad was still alive, so I'm probably very kind to him, as I am very kind to most people who are still alive. Once you're dead, the truth comes out, and I will tell it. Anyway, so inevitably, this created a distance between my dad and me, and the distance came with a desire to bond. I never did bond with my father, but I worked incredibly hard to that end. I'm happy to say that before he died, we did bond, and we did resolve a lot of issues. And I love my dad, and I miss him every day. So, my father had once wanted to be an actor, so I worked on becoming an actor. My dad played the keyboards, so I became a writer, though that's not quite the same keyboard. Like all children who come from a broken home, I had a need to feel accepted. A deep, empty hole in my gut where most people have love. So from my father, I learned a sense of urgency. From my mother, I learned guilt. Together, they were an impossible combination. In my attempts to interact with others, I found humor and became a class clown. But there was also a temperamental side to me. Temperamental side to me, which caused no end of trouble. To top it off, I was a small kid, thin, because we never had a lot of food in our house, and awkward thanks to misdiagnosed double vision not dealt with until I was in my late teens. That day in the 3rd grade, I remember being on the playground. I'd done something stupid, probably owing to my usual inadequacy at sports. Thanks, kids. The kids were laughing at me, and I remember thinking that I'd had enough. In my young mind, I was done with this shitty life, so I ran out in the middle of Raitt Street, which John Adams Elementary faced, and awaited my fate. Now wait. Let's stop for a moment and think about this. What's the worst that could have happened? Death? Hardly. Broken legs? Tops. What good would it have done me or my mother? And how would that have stopped anyone from laughing at me? It wouldn't have. So I guess I'm lucky that a teacher walked out into the street and asked me what I was doing. I can still remember that to this day. Right over there. I'm facing away from the school. Traffic's in this direction, yes? I'm facing away to a wall. Don't want to see the car coming because, of course, then I'd chicken out. All of a sudden, to my right, teacher walks up right next to me. What are you doing? Idiot kid. I remember looking around, and there was no traffic. Suicide would have to wait. Now, there's one of those ... things, so we're going to see how much. We have a lot to go. We have a whole lot. I hope you're ready, because we're going to be here a while. I made it another 8 years without trying to kill myself once. And in hindsight, that's quite surprising. As an unbalanced child, I turned into an unbalanced teenager. Sure, unbalanced teenager may be redundant, but let's just say I was unbalanced even for a teenager. As a teenager, it was no longer enough simply to get my parents' approval. By behaving or fighting with my siblings to show how much they didn't. There was always something unhealthy about the relationship we 3 children had with each other. We didn't just quarrel, we actively despised each other. No, as a teenager, I had to find something meaningful. There was this always seemed to lead to me writing and to acting. I was neither encouraged nor discouraged by my parents, who had their own lives to consider. The surprising exception being my stepmother, Blanche. But what no one knew about, and what I kept between myself and only a few close friends, was that I was experiencing what can only be termed severe emotional distress. It was difficult for me on a daily basis to deal with the demands high school presented. My response was to miss as many school days as possible, back when ditching was more of a pastime than an offense. I was fortunate enough to be naturally bright, so I could show up on test days without having to study a whole lot, and I squeaked by. Then along came Teresa. And when I bit my lip. And when she walked into my life, I nearly fell over. I was 17 and she was, well, nearly 14. Nearly 14. At the time, that's crazy, but I got to tell you, my wife and I have the same age difference. So everyone that told me she was too young for me can go, suck a bag of dicks. She was beautiful and funny And best of all, she liked me from the beginning. Not a lot of people in my life have liked me, so this is important. Vicky liked me from day one. It makes a difference. The beginning came one day in April 1983 at the Santa Ana High School auditorium. This enormous cavern of a building housing the school's theater. The auditorium had been built back in the 1950s, back when they were building such things. I was hanging around at the auditorium with Mike, the stage manager. Mike was one of the few positive male role models in my life who, coincidentally, also gave me a taste for Camel cigarettes. So when I say positive male role models, we're grading on a curve. For the most part, though, he was a positive role model. I was there in the auditorium with a few of my friends, all of us joking around, trying to be as cool and funny as we all thought Mike was. When into the auditorium walked Eugenia. And Eugenia shut down that nonsense right away. She was a Mexican girl in her teens with the body of a young Lauren Bacall. Even Mike stopped when she walked in. She was followed in by a younger girl. I've read 9 pages and my mouth is starting to get tired from all the talking. But I've been going for 50 minutes, so there you go. And well, they stopped right there. Eugenia introduced us all to Teresa, a friend from the other side of Santa Ana. Somehow, within about an hour, the two of us found a connection. When she had to leave, she gave me a hug, which wasn't hard because we were already in the dark of the theater's recesses with our arms around each other. She took a couple of steps away and asked if she'd like to go out sometime. I thought she was my age, honestly. She said she would and gave me her number. As she looked up at me, I figured I should make a move. I might not get another opportunity for some time, so I kissed her. It was only after Teresa left that I found out that she was 13. I felt profoundly like a child molester, probably because my friends were calling me one. So I put away her number, but I didn't throw it away. The girl and the kiss and the phone number burned a hole in my mind and my heart. And before summer came, we started dating. It wasn't easy. Santa Ana was by no means a small town, and I was a 17-year-old without a car. But I found my way to her by bus or by foot, by any means available. And we always found ways to go out. Even though my mom didn't approve of my dating a Mexican girl, I was old enough to see such approval as, I was old enough to see such disapproval as laughable. What my mom wasn't aware of, what I was painfully aware of, was our age difference. 4 years was just about a quarter of my lifetime back then. And it served to make things a little strange at times. Added to this, I was cast in a play that summer and had begun a flirtation with the pianist, Cynthia. The show was a musical, and Cynthia and I would find a lot of time to rehearse together. The flirtation quickly became something more, which ain't too hard when you're 17. I was seeing Cynthia every day, while Teresa and I saw each other about once a week. My friends were all encouraging me to see more of Cynthia. After all, she was my age, a cheerleader who had use of a car. And did I mention she was also my age? To this day, I regret ever listening to them. In early July, I broke up with Teresa over the phone, a chicken shit way to do it. Within hours, Cynthia and I were necking at Sunset Beach. But Cynthia was no Teresa. And within a couple of months, I was back in front of Teresa's house on 5th Street in Santa Ana, begging her to take me back. This is not a book about a good guy. This is a book about a guy who makes a lot of mistakes. I was that guy. But she wouldn't take me back. She told me I'd tossed her aside like a toy I'd grown bored of. As much as I was hurting at the time, the truth was I had treated her like shit. And she was right to refuse me. After all, how was she to know that another Cynthia wouldn't come along? And another one did, but not with her. That's a little teaser. I didn't bother to think of any of this at the time. In all honesty, I didn't know if I thought at all. All I could do was hurt. I walked away from her house and towards downtown Santa Ana in tears. As I neared Main Street, I couldn't imagine how I'd ever be able to live without Teresa. Life had long been hard enough. And now, to top all of that off, I had lost Teresa. Combined perhaps with an upbringing that reinforced my own sense of isolation, I was ready to try killing myself again. I didn't wait to do it either. I turned towards the nearest building and saw that it still had an old-fashioned fire escape. Quickly, I climbed up and was soon on the roof's ledge. I said a quiet goodbye, moved forward, and saw, of all things, a baseball cap caught in a rain gutter. Back then, Keith liked baseball caps, and I knew he'd like this one. Strange, though, that I'd be thinking of my brother at a time like this. But this distraction did an amazing thing. It provided me with a sense of what was going on, what I was in the midst of doing. I grabbed the cap and stepped off of the ledge. I was only about 4 stories up. A fall like that would surely break a few bones, but I don't think it would have killed me. I guess that's when I decided that the next time I chose to kill myself would be irreparable and certain. But for that day at least, I'd given up on suicide. I took the cap home to Keith, who did like it, though it did little to repair our relationship. And for the next couple of days, and for the next couple of years, I looked for someone to take Teresa's place. I'm going to stop there, though we're not at the end of chapter 1. Keep listening. Remember, Grand Canyon, One Man's Journey Through Depression is available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. I won't be reading this book in its entirety, but I sure hope you pick it up, listen to it, read it, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. And there you have it. You've just survived another Ken LaSalle video. For more information about new releases, projects in the works, or even stuff from the archives, head on down to kenlasalle.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and all around social media, just as long as it's called Facebook or Twitter. Thanks for your support, as always. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, and I'll be back soon with more nonsense.